everyone, good afternoon and welcome to the Baba House. My name is Michelle and we thank you for spending this afternoon with us today. We are very pleased to have with us Dr. Marc Rerceretnam, who will be sharing with us his ongoing research on the role of religion within colonial society in Singapore, in particular the historical convergence between the Straits Chinese community alongside the beliefs and practices of the Christian religion, as well as Baba Chang Ning Tai over there, who will also be sharing with us his personal experience today. So this talk was made possible and co-organized with the Peranakan Association of Singapore, and we have several members here today. Thank you for joining us this afternoon again. When TPA shared with us a few months ago, they had invited Dr. Marc to come for today's talk. We immediately agreed, as the roles and contributions of the Straits Chinese in colonial Singapore is an aspect that really deserves a lot more highlighting as well as further examination. So as part of our exhibition on the top floor, Glossaries of the Straits Chinese Homemaking, we have also begun surfacing materials on such aspects such as Professor Wong Gang Wu's examination of development of Peranakan identity against the formation of the nation state, Mr. Kwa Chong Guan's argument of the rise of the Straits Chinese as collaborators of the British administration, as well as various archival reports, of course, about the formation of the Straits Chinese British Association as well. So today we look forward to learning very much more about the roles in which the Straits Chinese played in the development of the churches as well as community leaders. So I'll pass on to Don, who will share more about Dr. Rerceretnam and introduce him officially. Thank you very much for joining us again.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dawn. I'm from the Peranakan Association Singapore, and we're very happy to co-curate this series of talks with the NUS Baba House. So Dr. Rerceretnam here is actually a historian, and he is a Sydney-based historian, but in the past 6 months, he's been in Singapore because he is a recipient of the Lee Kong Chian Fellowship issued by the National Library Board, and this is the subject of his studies. So he's part of it. So he has been done actually groundbreaking research into the Christianized Peranakans in early Singapore. So after his portion of the talk, we will hand the floor over to Baba Chang Ning Tai, who is an active member in the Peranakan community. And he is one of the few Catholic Peranakans who still know and practice the Semayang rituals. So it will be very interesting to hear from him how he marries his Catholic faith with these ancient rituals which many have forgotten. Okay, please enjoy the talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just introduce myself. I'm actually from Singapore originally, and I moved out about when I was in my 20s. Actually, I just finished my national service. That's why they let me back in for this visit, you know. And so I've been living in Sydney for about 30 years now. Now I'm one of those new people who are rediscovering my Peranakan roots. I'm half Tamil. But from my mother's side, we are very, very Peranakan, but it was never really spoken about. It's not that we are embarrassed about it, but they just chinchai lah, they can't be bothered. So I was the one starting to question. I was asking about general things about our family history, and after a while I began to realize, hold on, we are really Peranakan. And so that started really getting me interested. And so when I came over here, I came to Singapore back in January. And through my cousin Juliana, who's not here, we met up, and for the first time I first met Ronnie. Where's Ronnie? Somewhere around here. And then Colin soon after. And it was a lovely experience, just basically exchanging ideas and stuff like that. And that's at the very start of my research time. So at that time, I didn't know I was going to find something groundbreaking about Peranakans. My topic essentially is looking at intermarriage in early colonial Singapore. And that's my area one of my areas of specialty. I've been writing about it since 2012. Well, I've been publishing about it since 2012. So I guess I'm what you would call an expert in that area. So when I went into that, with that mindset, going into the data, I found this massive amount of all these new Peranakans being created. So that's how, that's when I told Colin and Ronnie, and everyone started getting excited, and this eventuated. So I hope I won't disappoint you, and we'll just start. Now, the aim of the talk is to present Maybe I should, no, okay. Hopefully I don't block any, because I'm quite tall. Do you have problems reading that if I stand here? It's okay, huh? Okay, the aim of the talk is to present outcomes from the National Library Research Fellowship, which I'm working under at the moment, to investigate the existence of intermarriage in early Singapore, as I said just now. Not necessarily to provide and I'm not here to necessarily outline the history of Christianity in Singapore, but I'm here to highlight certain key issues which took place under the church's watch. So Christianity is very wide, and there's no one type of Christianity, there's not one type of church. There are many different types of churches. And, but what I've identified as a historian, I've identified key aspects which back then would have been quite mundane. But by today's standards, we realize, hey, hold on, this is actually quite significant, because it relates directly to modern Singapore. So, okay, all of this info is presented in this talk will be published in the National Library Board in the coming months. Should anyone wish to use facts or quote from this research, Sean, please do not do so after the publication. If not, NLB will be very angry at me. All right. Basically, there are two articles coming out. One's in chapters on Asia Research, the Research Journal, and one is a magazine called BiblioAsia. I promised a shortened, abridged version to Dawn to publish in the Peranakan magazine, but I haven't got permission from NLB to do that yet, but I'll get it soon. So, or if failing which, just acknowledge me and acknowledge the fact that it's coming from NLB. All right, and if you have any questions, just email me there. Okay, the general findings from research, I'll just give an overview of what I found. All right. Intermarriage in early colonial Singapore is much more common than historically recognized. We have this idea in our head that further back in history you go, the more segregated we are. It is not true. In fact, it's the opposite. The more further away you travel from the more into the future you travel from 1819, the more racist we become, the more racially polarized we become. That's been my research. That's one of my research findings. Now, also, I want to emphasize that Peranakan communities predate 1819, correct? And so there were always intermarriages in the region. However, once the British came in, and this issue is recognized and acknowledged by key historians such as Wang Gongyu, who actually mentioned that once the British came in, they racialized the whole environment. People became aware of the different racial groupings, and they tended to segment themselves, isolate themselves, and to mix within their own groups because the British system basically encouraged them to do so. Prior to that, it was possible, it was fluid enough whereby Peranakan unions were able to thrive. After the British came in, it changed. So that's what I'm looking at over here. I'm looking after the British arrive, and it becomes more racialized. I found evidence of the first Singapore-specific mixed-race Peranakan unions over a 25-year period. It only happens between that period, 1834 to about 1858. There's a reason why it ends. It's nothing to do with race, well, kind of. It's more to do with conflict between churches. Many, and I'll discuss that later, many made new cross-cultural alliances and friendships. Teochews adopted new names and even dropped their clan names for several decades. So you come across, I'll show you some registry entries which I use as my raw data, where they just don't use their names. They call themselves Anthony Akau, which means nothing because where's the clan name? It's Tan Akau or Lim Akau or Chua, but it's not there. So, and that goes on well into the 1860s, 1870s. That's in the Catholic community. I can't speak for the other churches because I haven't gone into the data yet. And many diverse communities will, and I also found many diverse communities will cooperate and mix if a non-racial environment of goodwill and mutual trust is created and fostered. So commonalities in this new community was religion, new education opportunities, economic improvement, and better employment prospects. Now, this is a sort of, the churches, I don't think they meant to do this, but they created a new sort of social, political, social, economic ecosystem. Because when someone first converts and becomes Christian, they get access to a lot of other things apart from going to church, right? Because from after they what they next step, when you become a Christian, all of a sudden you're able to access the education system, and these Christian schools, these Christian churches started opening up schools. And back in the 1800s, most of the education system in Singapore was run by the mission school system. I think I've done a calculation for my PhD thesis, was 90%, and it continued well into after the Second World War. Only after the Second World War did the British start, say, okay, we're just about to leave, let's open schools. So, but prior to that, for 100 years, there were no schools. Everything was pretty much run by mission schools. So if you were converted to one of these churches, you had automatically access to an education system straight away, which meant you become proficient in English, you can read and write, which means you don't have to do what your father or mother is doing. You don't have to load big sacks onto a tongkang anymore. Okay, now you can work on a desk job, you can get paid a professional salary. So all of that just added on. And that's why you find, in most cases, I'm not saying all, most cases, Christian families generally become middle class, almost straight away, within one generation. So I also found evidence of renegade Teochew communities. This is within the Catholic Church. I'm not, because I haven't found evidence of this in Methodist and all, because I think that was too late anyway. But in the 1830s, I found evidence of renegade Teochew communities not keen on identifying or participating with non-Christian Kongsi-related communities. So between the 1830s and 1850s, there was great animosity between Taoists and Catholics. All right, and in fact, there were even riots, the 1851 anti-Catholic riots of Gang and Kranji and Bukit Timah was all happening in Singapore at the time. The differences began to appear to dissipate from the 1870s onwards. Okay, so race appeared to play a minor role, and this was despite the fact that the British colonial government were beginning to rank races according to racial attributes. So these were the very early days. I'm starting here from the 1830s. The Brits hadn't quite formulated their racial theories yet. They were beginning to, but they hadn't. And also by that, while they were, it was racial theories in Europe were also beginning to formulate, but it was still basically discussed at a sort of a academic level. It hadn't quite filtered down into normal society, let alone colonial societies like Singapore. So, the ideas of racial hierarchies or racial abilities haven't yet quite gone down to sort of Mr. Cooley, who's working in the docks, or Mr. Clark, who's working in an office nearby. So this happens later. So what I will not be doing, I will not be providing an overview of religious practices. I'll leave that to the second speaker. All right? I will not be providing an assessment of religiosity or spirituality. I will not be comparing the effectiveness or relevance of one religion against another or religious order over another. And I will not be discussing Christianity's role in relation to Western colonialization, because that's a whole topic all on its own, and I'm not going to cover that here. So just to start at the very beginning, just to give you an idea of religion in the Malay archipelago. All right, the first religion that starts formalized, I would say formalized religion, because there will always be religion in many countries, in many areas. People living in a jungle, in a kampong area, they'll have their river spirits, and they'll be worshipping a hill or mountain, but when we talk about formal religions like Hinduism, which arrived around 400 AD and dominated the Malay archipelago for most of that time, and Christianity only enters. Christianity only enters. Where's the pointer? Christianity only enters in the 1500s. So what we are doing is we are we're actually only just looking at this section here. So it's a very, very small part of the whole history of religion in the Malay archipelago. So we're only looking at a finite area. So just to give people some sort of perspective. So the history of Christianity in the Malay archipelago, it first arrived with the Portuguese in 1511. However, the Portuguese were quite controversial. They were actually quite violent, and they did not make themselves popular with the local communities. So essentially what happened was that it never caught on, and Christianity had little long-term impact or effect on the local populations in the Malay region. Consequently, it remained within the limited confines of its small community of the Christian descendants. So when I talk about Christian, Peranakan Christians, I'm talking about what the community that calls them Portuguese in Malacca, all right? So essentially, Christianity basically was confined just within that small community. And it took several centuries before a new wave of Christian evangelization became apparent with the arrival of British interests, and then generally with mainly only non-Muslim immigrant arrivals. So with the expulsion of the Roman Catholic Portuguese in 1641, the Dutch arrived, and they did little to propagate the Protestant faith. They were much more, they saw it as their own faith. They didn't want to they had their own reasons for not sort of spreading it. So essentially, the French play a very large role in evangelization in the area. And so by 1781, with the help of the Sultan of Kedah, French Roman Catholic missionaries set up a station in Kedah where they oversaw a group of refugee Roman Catholics from Siam. Remember, this is before, 1781 is before Penang, before the establishment of the British outpost in Penang. So when the Brits, I can't remember what year, is it 1786, they formed Penang, the French actually moved over to Penang, and that's why you find a lot of the churches over there date from about that time, from the 1790s. So, so let's jump forward about 3 decades forward to Singapore. Okay, following the establishment of the British on the island of Singapore in February 1819, French priest Reverend Imbert visits Singapore in 1822 and reports back to the Bishop of Siam that, that Singapore only has 12 or 13 Roman Catholics. Now, these Roman Catholics are probably Malaccan, Peranakan Christian people, all right, because there were reports that many Malaccans were actually coming over to Singapore for better prospects. And while they don't identify them as Christian, I believe quite a few of them, there were quite a few people coming over. So Father Imbert spotted 12 or 13 of them in 1822. Now, a few years later, the Portuguese mission. Now, there's a big difference between these two groups. The Roman Catholics at the time, there were feuding groups. There was the Portuguese mission and there was the French mission. Now, the French mission eventually won out, but the Portuguese mission at the time was the main one around. Because remember, I think in the 1600s, the Vatican split the world into two. And one half was what they gave the Portuguese full reign with regards to the propagation of Catholicism in the world. And Singapore and this whole part of the world was part of their area. So, but by the 1800s, it was basically redundant, and so the French didn't take notice of it, but the Portuguese were keen to sort of put their foot down about that. So the Portuguese mission actually set up a small church in 1825, but it was very small and very, very under-resourced. And also you have to remember that the perspective of Christianity was very narrow as well, because they are only used to looking after the Christian Peranakans from Malacca. So they didn't see their responsibility as being to anyone else. So you had all these hundreds of thousands of people coming into Singapore, and they didn't even bother to touch them. They didn't even bother to approach them. So they were very, very sort of, limited in their scope. Along come the French, okay? 10 years later, the French decide, okay, this is an opening, we're coming to Singapore. They set up a permanent base, and with the help of Father Bouchot and Father Yegros, and actually Father Yegros, a bit of a funny story over there. Father Yegros is actually from the Portuguese mission. He went over the Portuguese mission, they kicked him out, and he actually got so angry, he joined the French mission. So he helped set up, both of them helped set up Bras Basah Road. So where all the, you know what the Catholic Quarter is now, where old St. Joseph's is, which is now Sam? St. Joseph's, and behind it, the land which became where St. Peter and Paul, that was all given to them at the time in 1832 because of these two people, okay? And at those early days, there were approximately 300 people in the Roman Catholic congregation, and 90% of them were Malacca Kristang people, and the rest of them were a smattering of Teochew and probably a few Eurasians from Penang and Bencoolen and places like that. So this is 1831. Okay, let's jump over to Protestant missions. Now, the Protestants actually came to Singapore before Catholics. And the earliest Protestant missionary to come to Singapore was actually a guy called Robert Morrison, who came to Singapore. He was from the London Missionary Society. I think he was Presbyterian. And in 1823, he wanted to start up an Anglo-Chinese college in Singapore. He didn't try very hard, I feel, because I know reading accounts of other people trying to set up a school, they stay for much longer than that. He stayed for a few months, maybe a year, and when he couldn't raise enough money, he just chaboted, went back to London and gave up, basically. There were a few other Protestant missions in the area, like, for example, Benjamin Keysbury, who used to run a Malay school down at the bottom end of River Valley Road, near Zion Road area. And, but it remained a very small venture, and it never really grew. So Protestant movements in Southeast Asia, this is not only Singapore, in Southeast Asia were very, very, they all prioritized China. Everyone was heading to China. So basically, they didn't see Southeast Asia as a priority. So, and so because of that, the Roman Catholics had open slather, and that's probably why the Roman Catholic Church is so big today in this part of the world, because of that early start. They had a 50-year jump on the Protestant missions. The Protestants didn't start work until the 1880s. Okay, however, some of the original Protestants in Singapore were actually Peranakans. And some of them was like Song Hut Kiam, who was a member of the Presbyterian Church, who converted in 1847. And there are a few others as well, like Ong Siang, who is actually Song Hut Kiam's son, Fu Teng Kui and Tan Bun Shin. And also there's, for the Methodist Church, there's Goh Hut Keng, who's actually Goh Keng Swee's granduncle, I think. Grandfather, granduncle. I think that's it. So you have lots of these Peranakans joining the Protestant church. But like I said, the Protestant church was very small at the time and continued to remain small. Now the earliest, this is a fact that's recognized historically in Singapore, which this study is going to debunk, was that the earliest, currently the claim for the oldest Peranakan Christian family in Singapore belongs to Song Hut Kiam. All right? And Song was converted to Christianity in 1846, 1847 in Britain. And they were members of the Presbyterian Church. Basically, this research brings back that period about 14 years. So we bring it down to the early 1830s. So when did Peranakans convert? That's another question that people ask me. Now, I've not been able to pinpoint exactly when they do. There's no specific time when Peranakan communities converted to Christianity, as far as I can see. They probably did it in spurts or individual initiatives. I hear lots of stories about, great-grandfathers or great-great-grandfathers marrying, meeting a Catholic girl or whatever, a Christian girl, and then basically converting, and then as a result, that whole family that arm of the family becomes Christian. So it's those sort of things that's happened. There was no particular time where a large chunk or large communities actually convert en masse. I haven't come across that. I could be wrong. Maybe another researcher will come up with more information, but I haven't seen any research that accounts for that. Now, Roman Catholic conversion began in 1833. Okay, it starts extremely early and continued well into the 20th century. Anglican conversions began after the 1870s, and Anglicans, basically, the numbers remain quite small in comparison to the Roman Catholic. Methodist conversion was actually quite strong, and it began after 1885. There might be occasional ones that happened prior to that, but the Methodists only opened their first serious church group establishment in 1885. So, and the Methodist Church was dominated by the Peranakan community, and they were very, very, how do you say? By today's standards, if you'd be visited by ISD if you're in the Peranakan community back then. They were very outspoken, very, very. Let's say they were ahead of their time, basically. You know, they were very, very. They questioned the Brits a lot in their journals, and I wrote about one of them and I published one in a piece. A very interesting group. And the Presbyterians, of course. The Presbyterians, they originally converted Song Hut Kiam back in 1846, 1847. But in 1847, they left Singapore because they all chabuted and went to China. So basically, everything collapsed over here with regards to the Presbyterian Church. So Peranakan Singapore, this one is a general one, nothing in relation to Christian Church, but Peranakans in Singapore, the information is extremely skimpy. The book that is sort of the reference book for the history of Peranakans in Singapore at the moment is a book by Rudolf Jürgen. I don't know if many of you have heard of him, or had he spoken here before for your organization. He wrote a book in 1998 called Constructing Identities, the History of Babas in Singapore. And it's very concise, but when it comes to identifying when Peranakans came to Singapore, or where they came from, or how they got here, there's just no information. So what he does, he says he's interviewed William Gui and Lim Kit Lim, and they speculate that many of the Chinese came from Malacca. And also there's mentioned about many of the Peranakans coming from Java as well. Now these communities would have married within their own Peranakan communities, because remember, these guys, they come from a mature community. When I mean by mature community, that means they've existed for about 100, 200 years previously. So you would have big networks of families. You're not like the Teochews Teochew men coming in from China. They got no one. They got no families. There's no network. There's no women. These guys had everything here. So current academic research claims Peranakan communities in Singapore came from other areas. They did not originate from Singapore, and that's one of the key points of my thing, because I'm going to contradict that. So going back to the Roman Catholic mission, Roman Catholic Church were keen to work in Southeast Asian region and were not solely focused on China, unlike the Protestants. Within a year of the establishment of the first Roman Catholic chapel, they basically opened it up, consecrated it in 5th of May 1833, and it was located on the front lawn of the former SGI building. All right, now the SAM building. This was a small wood chapel which measured 18 meters by 9 meters, so it wouldn't have been much bigger, about the size of this courtyard, And remember, there were 300 people, so this building would be very tight, for 300 people to have in there during Mass, and it would have been quite a hot experience. So back in those early days, in 1839, 1832, there were approximately 300, and by the late 1830s, it had gone up to about 400. All these are estimates, because there's no data. We just assess it. And so most, like I said earlier, most of them were Peranakan Kristang, and a minority of them were Teochew. But the Teochews were coming in a big way into Singapore, so they grow very fast, and by the 1840s, they become the dominant group. Okay, this is a map of which shows the church. How does this thing work? Oh, there it is. Okay. Can you see that little square over there? That's the only picture I've come across of the church. The little chapel, the 18 meter by 9 meter chapel. So this is Bras Basah Road, that's Queen Street, that's Waterloo Street. So it's right up against Bras Basah Road. All right, and this map's from 1835. There's no photographs. Photography was only invented in 1839, and the first photographs were taken in Singapore in 1841. So there's no photographs of that old building. Now this is just a very early photograph of the old St. Joseph's Institution, and you notice. Oh, sorry. The building has been demolished by that point. This is about 1865. This is a photograph I found from one of the National Archives thing, and basically you can see St. Joseph's over there, but you can't, it's kind of blocked. This is Bras Basah Road. This hill over here is where Cathay Building now stands. So you're looking from that. And that's interesting over there. You know what that is? Dhoby Ghat, exactly. It's all, the Dhoby is all drying their white linen. Because the river's just down there. So they wash all the linen and they dry it up in the field. And this area here, that's the old jail. So basically, this building would have been up here. So this is Bras Basah Road down here, and that would be quite there. So if you do a dig over there, you probably find the footing of the original building there. So this building was built in 1832, well, it was opened in 1832, and it became too small because the congregation's growing. So what they do, in 1841, they start fundraising. And by 1847, they get enough money to build the Church of the Good Shepherd, which still stands today. But now it's called the Cathedral of the Good Shepherd. All right? Now, at the time, there were only two main churches in the Roman Catholic Church. There was the Good Shepherd Church, and there was the Bukit Timah Church, which is called St. Joseph's Bukit Timah. Now, this photograph was taken quite late, so that photograph's probably for about 100 years old. But back in the day, when it was first opened in 1847, it probably would have been an Atzap hut. So this church essentially catered, because Teochews largely were into the Gambia and pepper industry. And so this would have catered to all the Gambia and pepper farms in the area. This is a photograph of, I'm not saying these are Catholic, these probably not, but this is what they probably would have looked like. These men are working, probably Teochews working in a pepper plantation in Singapore or Johor. So at the moment, I've not found any evidence of older established Peranakans in the Roman Catholic Church starting in 1831. So as far as I can find, there are no Peranakans there. From the established group, yeah, from Penang, from Java, and places like that. The earliest evidence of Christian converts were Teochew-born, were China-born Teochews in the Catholic Church, and most of them, most were Teochew men. The earliest record of conversion is 10th of September 1833, when 4 of them were baptized by this priest, Father Etienne Aubrand. Now, for some, the Roman Catholic Church, well, any church for that matter, is very pedantic. They record everything, you know, record names, record dates, everything. But for some stupid reason, they didn't record these 4 men. So I don't know who they are. I just know one of them's 25 years old, that's all. So it's probably been lost over the years. Okay, yeah. This one is, I'm just reiterating what I've mentioned earlier. The makeup of the church was made up mainly of the Christian community. There was smattering of Teochew men, but there were a large group of them in the church. There were a smattering of Europeans, Eurasians, and when I talk about Eurasians here, I'm talking about first, second, and third generation, usually from Penang, from Madras, or from Bencoolen. All right, Bencoolen now it's in Indonesia. And the church did not keep statistics or lists of congregations. So essentially, to get a feel of the numbers, you actually have to go through the marriage certs, the birth certs, the baptism certs, to have an idea of how big each community is. Now, there is clear evidence that the Roman Catholic Church in the 19th century, and this also is true of the Methodist Church, because I've done a close examination of Methodist Church, they did not discourage intermarriages and even facilitated marriage between its racially diverse congregants. Now, remember, Singapore, under the British, was actually quite divided. You had a Malay section, you had a sort of a, well, not Malay, but Arab, Muslim section, you had a so-called Chinese section, and probably that was broken down into different dialect groups. You had a Tamil section and that sort of thing. So, and Singapore at the time, there was no entity in Singapore which was multiracial, and this is the only entity that I found that was multiracial at the time. So in that way, the Roman Catholic Church was well ahead of its time, about 100 years, more than 100 years ahead of its time. I highlighted this point in the 2012 study that I published in the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies, based on church records dating back to the latter half of the 19th century. Now, which I found church facilities such as orphanages, they help facilitate intermarriages. And that study, that 2012 study, basically I only had access to data from 1860s, 1870s onwards to modern day. Now, for this research, I've been able to get access to earlier records to 1832, and I was expecting to find intermarriages, but what I found was masses of intermarriages, which absolutely shocked me. I started going through the data, and within 10 minutes, my mouth was agape, and I didn't know how to close it, And significantly, this new material clearly shows that intermarriage within the racially mixed congregations was much more prevalent, most significantly between the newly arrived China-born Teochew males and females from the old Peranakan Christian community, and also some Malays and indigenous women. So let's talk about whether it was possible to get married in Singapore back in those days. Sorry. The gender ratio in Singapore was extremely skewed. Now, Singapore back then was a frontier town. Many of you would have watched movies or TV shows on TV about those American frontier towns where you go in a stagecoach and everyone's a man. Singapore was very much like that. There was no gun-slinging street fights, but maybe there were, but I'm not aware of it. But anyway, there were no women. 1823, 8 women to 1 man. 1850 gets worse, 12 men to 1 woman. 1860, 15 men to 1 woman. So it gets worse and worse, and this problem doesn't solve itself till the 1930s. So that's, your grandparents' generation. It's only around that time, it was beginning to actually balance off, where you have, 50% men, 50% women. Prior to that, it was really hard because, it's difficult to find someone marriageable. So marriage was only viable for people who could afford it or who had existing familial networks. Now, I'll explain what I mean by who could afford it later on. Peranakan community gender ratio was very balanced because, like I said, Peranakan communities, they were mature communities. They've been here for about 200-300 years prior. So basically, they had their own community to rely on. There was enough women to go around. And so everyone basically was able to get married. But China-born Teochew males did not have this because they were so new. One other problem I had doing this research is it's really difficult finding photographs and pictures. Firstly, because photography didn't exist in the 1830s. Secondly, getting a picture painted was a luxury, which would have been the last thing on their minds for many, organizations like churches, because they were struggling to build buildings, and the last thing they want to do is spend some money on doing a painting. So, I found this picture which just gives you an idea of what the Chinese converts would have looked like back then. This photograph is actually, not photograph, this painting or wood graving is of James Legge, who was actually based in Malacca for a while. And he was from the LMS, the London Missionary Society. So I assume he was Presbyterian. And these three Chinese gentlemen are actually from Hong Kong. So I assume they're Cantonese. But just to give you an idea, just have a sort of picture of what the people we are talking about, what they may have looked like. Now, this photograph, Ronnie would be familiar with. Where's Ronnie? Yeah. This photograph was given to me 3 months ago, like within a week of arriving in Singapore. This is the earliest photograph I have of a Catholic family in Singapore. And this dates back to about 1880. Now, so, I mean, the fact that it's old, it's fantastic. But because we're talking about intermarriage here, can you spot the non-Chinese person there? Non-Chinese. Now this is that one, the short lady. Yeah. So, it just gives an example. I mean, when you're not looking for it, it's there as well. Basically, that's an intermarriage between these two. These two were married in 1876. I've only read about them, I've heard about them, but I've never seen a photograph. And just by chance, a relative of mine passed it to me and said, oh God, okay, we have a photograph of them. So, I mean, and these were all Teng Sua Lai people, these are Teochew from China. And so the divisions between and assumptions that you have to marry a Teochew person was not quite as strong, and it was quite common, and particularly in the Roman Catholic Church, for marriages to happen. And that girl, she actually came from the CHIJ orphanage. She's a legitimate daughter of Spanish man who had a child with an Indonesian woman. And her father used to live on what they call now Blanco Court. So her father was Blanco. Okay. So okay. There are no Teochew Chinese Catholic women to marry. Marrying non-Catholics are not an option. The priest would just say, no, not allowed. Okay, so they have to find someone. Most of the community comprised of poor farmers and laborers, coolies. They had no financial enticement to offer potential brides. Because you want to get married, you're going to be a poor coolie, you approach someone, they're going to look at you and say, nah, I can find better, Yeah, you look good looking, but you've got no prospects. I want to make sure that I can look forward to a meal on my table every day. All right, so most of them actually can't marry as a result. But some, and also the established Peranakan Chinese communities were unlikely to accept many of these Senkei, Teochew, China-born guys to marry their daughters. And it's very difficult for them to do. So what options do the Teochew, China-born men have? You make do. Okay, with no options open to them, many looked within the Catholic Church. And so between 1834, and I break this up into periods, okay? So the first period, 1834 to 1843, it's just random. I just did about 10 years. Majority of the marriages involving China-born and Teochew-born males happened with Peranakan Christian. And also, to put it into context, there's someone else, Tan Beng Hui, who actually did some work, and she came up to the conclusion that many of these China-born men were actually much more worldly than you would think. There's evidence to show that many of them had sex with anybody. They didn't care what racial background you came from, okay? And so they were quite familiar on at least on a sexual level, with the concept of plural society. So now all of a sudden they have to marry someone who's not Chinese. I think it would be quite a comfortable thing for them. So this is some raw data from 1833 to 1843. Now, I'll go through this very quickly because I've got 4 of these and it takes time to go through them. The left-hand side is the males. The bottom, the longitudinal area is females. Okay, so the light blue is Chinese. orange is Christian, gray is Malay. You have them all here, okay? So let's look at the Chinese first, China-born, because they are the most interesting. Okay, I don't know how this guy, he found a Chinese girl in 1830 something. I don't know where he got her from, but he found her. The rest of them all are married to Christian people, and this one here are Malay and indigenous. Okay, so these Chinese were marrying, but 90% of them were all non-Chinese, or I said non-Teochew. The Christian, being a mature society, community, basically they marry Christian mainly, okay? There was one Chinese girl who married one of them, I don't know. Indians, for some reason, I think these would come in pairs, so they always married Indians, all right? And then the Eurasians basically were only marrying Eurasians. The Europeans were marrying all over the place. Now the Europeans, this is a very uncommon thing to do. Basically in the 19th century, it didn't stop till about the 1920s or 30s. The Europeans basically tended to have harems in this part of the world. I think throughout all the colonies. And if they did have children, they usually had them illegitimately. And these people here basically are the decent ones who actually got married to them. All right? So this is actually very rare. Okay, this is an explanation I just went through. Oh, sorry. There you go. Okay, now the next slide, I'm going to show you where I get this information from. These come from books, registry books, which are about that big. A lot of them have since been scanned, and so I can get access to them at the National Archives of Singapore. They're all stored over there now, the scans. To get access to these scans, you have to go through the Catholic Church, and it's quite a lengthy process. You have to prove why you want to. Usually they want to know what the reason you want to go in there for. And for me, I'm saying, okay, I'm from Catholic background, many of them are my relatives, and then over the years I've been able to sort of explain, look, this is my area of study. So now the Catholic Church trusts me, and after many, it took me about 20 years, they've let me in. Okay, I had to block out some names because, like I said, this data was given to me on the proviso that I not make it public. So there's nothing really to embarrass anyone about, and the only way you can identify anybody here is like the family from this family, but I blacked out the name over there, the family name I should say. Now, that's all in Latin, you know. This is all in Latin, but I've translated here. So in the year, Anno Domino, in the year 1834, 22nd of May, I have written below, now this is the priest writing this, okay? I have written below in marriage, in Catholic Church law, Joseph Ahi. Notice how they don't use the clan name. Joseph Ahi, Chinaman. I assume that's Chinaman. This is a synonym. China-born, so I just say Chinaman. Allowing Magdalene and then the surname, at whose faith signed the priest. Okay, so that's a typical entry. Let's go to the next one. Now this one is from 1843, and it has a bit more information. This is a marriage between Anthony Akau. You notice how you don't use clan names? Anthony Akau. I think it's the Tan. That's Tan, isn't it? Then what is that? Don't know. Okay, doesn't matter. Okay, so basically, he's marrying this daughter from this people originally from Malacca. Okay, so this is another Teochew marrying Malaccan girl. All right, and the previous one, I suspect she's illegitimate because notice how they just say Joseph Ahi, Chinese, with Magdalene and then her name, but there's nothing at the end. Usually at the end they'll say legitimate daughter of such and such from such and such a place. There's no information. That means they have no information. That means she doesn't know who her parents are. Okay, so she's probably an orphan. This one's not an orphan. okay? And you can see he's actually can sign his name, you know. So he's quite socially mobile. He has an education. And the Malaccan girl, and probably that's one of the parents, they can't sign, so they just do a cross. Very common, very, very common. This is another one. Now this one I can show because I got permission from the family to show. This one is, in 1841, 6th of September, a marriage between Pedro Anokia is actually Nong Kia or Tan Nong Kia. But again, they dropped their clan names, right? Marrying Joanna Angao. Now she's supposed to be Malay. And that's her parents over there. So her parents were still around. But interestingly enough, look who it's witnessed by. Not a single Chinese person. So these guys were mixing heavily with all these non-Chinese people, heavily mixing. You know, these are the, you would assume that you would have for best man, you'd have your best friend. So they have George Leclerc, Bartholomew Jacob as his best man. And Philip and Joachim, I'm not quite sure exactly how that relates. Maybe one of them is a woman, I have no idea. But you know, just shows they were they were mixing. And also, his name is Pedro. Who names themselves Pedro? You know? And it's very common, those early days, there were a lot of these Teochew men who were naming themselves Portuguese names. There's Domingo, there's Pedro. Pedro's brother's name is João. João is Portuguese for John. Huh? Which one? This one? No, they're not Chinese. This one I know from the family. The family say that she's either Malay or Orang Asli. Okay. This one is the last one. I'm just giving an example. 1841 again, basically between Joachim. Now Joachim is a very Portuguese name as well. Now he's a Chinaman from China, but that's Ashiva. I don't know what Ashiva is. You know, this is all phonetic. You know, they tell the priest the name and then they write it down as they hear it. So I don't know what Ashiva is or Ashia. Maybe this he said Ashia and then they write it as Ashiva. So and again, you see all these people. Basically, they're mixing with different people, all witnessed by all different people who are not Chinese. And he's, you know, Joachim. Joachim is a Portuguese name. So, you know, the strong evidence of intermixing between the two largest groups in the Roman Catholic Church, you know, 1850s, and continues into the 1830s and continues well into the 1850s, right? Many adopted Portuguese names, you know, Pedro, Joachim. There's one I just found the other day, Domingo. There's João, and there's one even who adopted the name Peter de Santa Maria. With no clan name, just Peter de Santa Maria. So if you see a Santa Maria in Singapore, tell them they're Teochew. I think they'd be very happy. I know a few of them, and they won't be very happy. So the friendships are apparent by the fact that many witness each other's weddings. And between the 1830s and 1850s, most Teochew Catholics did not use their clan names in church records, I assume, within the church environment, because they still sign their clan names in Chinese script. But in the church environment, they don't use them. Now, there are probably a few reasons, because at the time, there was a lot of problems with the Taoist Teochews who were targeting the Catholic Teochews. So there was a lot of ill will between the two. So many of them didn't want to identify the Kongsis, didn't want to identify with the clan groups. So that's probably why they dropped their names. But they begin to adopt it again from about 1860s, 1870s. So, so I just talk about clan names, and you know, this might be a conscious effort on the part of the Roman Catholic Teochews. Okay, so what were the Teochews and Christian communities? Why were they close? So this is my analysis, okay? Not saying that it's right, but this is how I see it. They were they were both had complementary interests, all right? The Christian were established in the region since the 1500s, They had their families with them, and so they had a decent gender ratio within the community. Other communities like the Europeans and Eurasians, now the Europeans, of course, we know they are going to be a bit snobbish. The Eurasians were very snobbish too, because remember, these are not normal, not equivalent to the Christians, you know. These guys are second, third generation European, and this, you know, this is a very racial period where the more European you look, the more higher up, social hierarchy you are. And so they viewed Teochew males as their social inferiors. So there's no way a Teochew male is going to be marrying one of the Eurasian community over there. You know, especially a woman. If you're going to be a Teochew male wanting to marry a Eurasian woman, you know, my God, you know, everyone throws their arms up in the air. Because, you know, it's a patriarchal society. You're not supposed to marry a male who's supposed to be much more superior to yourself, you know, and who's such a social inferior. So it was just a no-no. It never happens. The Christians, on the other hand, also were looked down by the Eurasians, and the Christians were, the Christians were very poor. Most of them were fishermen and fishmongers. Okay, the majority of the Teochews were poor too. And however, there were a handful of the Teochew males who possessed some degree of economic clout. And I believe it is these men who had some degree of economic clout. Now, they didn't have to be very rich. One of them, they could have a small business somewhere. They could have a tiny little farm. And that's enough to attract a pretty young girl from the Christian community and the parents to arrange for marriage. So the ones that do get married are the ones who have some degree of clout. So a lot of the poor coolies actually don't get the opportunity. And in fact, marriage is very rare in the Catholic Church because there weren't enough matches to go around. But marriage within the Chinese community, because most of the Chinese just weren't able to attract, did not have the economic clout to attract the opposite sex. 1843 to 1850, okay? It continues, but by this time, you're getting more Chinese women coming in. Jürgen Rudolph, who's the expert on Peranakans in Singapore, basically says after 1850, Chinese women start being shipped in slowly. Small numbers, you know, the gender ratio is terrible still, but they are coming in. So it's reflected, so they're coming in. But they're still marrying Christians, and they're still marrying Malays. One marries the Indian girl here, and that one, Peranakan. Peranakan from Malacca. I don't know how she came around, but she's there. I assume she's Peranakan, the way they spelled her name. And also the fact that she's from Malacca. The Christian men still marrying Christian women. One marries a Eurasian. Indians marry Indians. One marries a Eurasian there. The Eurasians are beginning to diversify slightly. So one marries a Christian, one marries an Indian, and the rest of them are Eurasian. The Europeans are quite diversified as well. They marry Christian, Chinese, and then European. No, that's Eurasian and then European. And the other males I can't identify. Those are usually either unidentifiable or Filipino. Let me have a drink. Any questions? Any questions? Yeah, probably. But you see, after 1860s, 1870s, they start using the clan names even in the church. So why were they not using it before, and why were they using it after the 1860s, 1870s? So okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Probably. Probably they're married over there. You know? Yeah. There's actually like Tan Nokia. There's actually some people have actually said that he might have been married in China, and this might be his second marriage over here. But quite, you know, you don't tell the priest because he's 31. He was 31 over there. So we'll never know, lah. You know. So let's move on. 1850 to 1858. So this one is kind of in the cusp. Now, I was telling you about how, I've been emphasizing how the Teochew men are pairing off with Christang, and basically there's a understanding and a strong mix between the two. Now, I don't know if you're aware about the churches in the area, in the city area. You know, there's Good Shepherd Church, which was built 1846. There's St. Peter and Paul's Church, built 1870, but this St. Peter and Paul's all after this period. Then next, just up the road, Victoria Street, there's the Portuguese mission, St. Joseph's, which was built in 1853. So took them about 40 years, the Portuguese mission. They got their act together and they finally built their own church. Now this is during that period. So you have the French having all these Portuguese, these Malacca Christian people in the French mission, and must have really, really angered the Portuguese mission group. So they finally built that church. And so what happens around this time, it doesn't show yet because it only happens after 1853. I'll show the next one. But in 1853, they all move over to the church, up 700 meters up the road to Victoria Road, okay, to the new church. So they are still mixing, okay? A lot of Chinese, but there are a lot of Christians, a lot of Malays. There's a Eurasian girl that marries one of the Chinese guys. Actually, I should look more into that. Now, as expected, the Christian community, basically, they marry their own because there's lots of them. And there's all still ongoing intermarriage. Even the Indians intermarrying as well. Well, they're intermarrying the last chart, but you know. So there's a lot of intermarriage going on. Now, I'll show you the next picture, which shows the impact of after the Portuguese, the Christians moved to the new church. They all disappear. So the Chinese start marrying Chinese. There's a little bit of intermarriage here. Christian marry Christian. One Eurasian, I don't know what race is. I can't identify that race of that one. Indians marry Indians. Eurasians marry Eurasians. A bit of intermarriage there. So, so what happens that there was a lot of competition between the French mission and the Portuguese mission. And so when the Christian community moved over to Victoria Road, what I suspect, and I haven't found evidence for this yet, I'll have to go through the papers, I haven't done it yet, but I believe there was strong division, and you can still feel it to this day. Strong division between Portuguese mission and the French mission. And so what the Portuguese mission, I'm not sure if the French would have done the same thing, but the Portuguese mission definitely would have forbade contact with all the others from the other side, from the other church. And so what happens is that the numbers of Teochew and Christian marriages just drop overnight. After 1853, you hardly get any marriages at all. And this is, so 1858, so, you know, yeah, so anyway. So I'd like to break down the Catholic perspective. I'd like to break it down into the city church and the country church. Now, in the country church, the city church, which is Good Shepherd Church, the chapel first, the tiny little chapel in front of the Sam building, and later on the church, which when they moved over the road, which is still there, there were 125 marriages that were celebrated between 1834 and 1858, right? Out of the 125, 42 were mixed race unions, so that's 33%. That's very, very high. 33%. Of that, 25 or 20% were first generation Peranakan unions. So this is another area, Colin, that we should look into. These are the original Singaporean Peranakans, these 25. I've only identified one family. I'm trying to identify the other 24, okay? Christian Teochew marriages ended after the move to Victoria Street, as I mentioned earlier. In St. Joseph's, marriages were far lower because remember, a lot of them were coolies. They couldn't afford to, they weren't able to afford to attract a mate, all right, a girl. So there were far less marriages. Now, this community was not a small community, you know, there were probably about anything between 300 to 500 people in that area during this period of time. And there, over that period, only 71 marriages, over 33 years, 71 marriages, approximately 2 weddings a year. That's terrible. And there's only one intermarriage with an Indian girl in 1870. So there's a huge discrepancy between city and rural. And I believe that's largely due to wealth, because many rural farmers and laborers did not have enough assets to attract a bride. Now, in conclusion, okay, so just to go through, basically, intermarriages in early Singapore is much more common than historically recognized. The diverse communities, it goes to show, the evidence goes to show that diverse communities will cooperate and even intermarry if an environment of goodwill and mutual trust is created and fostered. Only men with some degree of financial means were able to attract the bride. The Catholic Church also, and this is very important because this was counter to what the Brits were doing, the British government was doing. The Catholic Church did not appear to adopt racial divisions. So they did not encourage racial divisions, you know, about talking about cultural differences, biological differences, because by the latter half of the 1800s, you're having discourse about, say, for example, the lazy native discourse, which is coming into play now. It was still being regurgitated, you know, to us. And I mean, like, for example, when I came to Singapore and I picked up that picture from that relative of mine, he started regurgitating a lot of this lazy native stuff. And I didn't ask him about it, but he just gave it to me. I just sat there, was, you know. And so it's still very much around the place and was very much around back then as well. The commonalities are easily fostered, and there was like I mentioned before, it became an ecosystem where you had people who converted, and then as a result, they were able to assess a strong degree of social mobility because of instant access to education, English education, which was so difficult to get at the time. I don't think any of the Chinese at the time realized when they converted, they were going to get access to this. But within one generation, pretty much everybody was up one level, one class up, and they became middle class when they became professional. And also, this is the first account of the creation. I'm not saying it's the only account. It's the first account that's been found by anyone of a Singapore-specific Peranakan communities where marriage between China-born males with local Malay and Christian women. And these families, I know of one family, which is my own, became Peranakan and were recognized as so within one generation. Yeah. They came later. They came under the French mission. They came in dribs and drabs, but I think the Irish were brought in by the French, largely because there were complaints about the French not being able to teach English properly. So the Irish started coming in 1870s, I think. Around there, give or take a decade. Yeah. So the Irish came in later. Yes.
Hello. I noticed that your data actually distinguish between Eurasians and Christian. So, who were the prominent Eurasian communities of the time, barring the Malaccan Christian?
And Mark, thanks for this very interesting talk. Thanks for this interesting talk. And I'd like to introduce King Tai, who will give us a very personal narrative of his own experience as a Catholic.
Hi, good afternoon. And I see many familiar faces. Pure Peranakan, so I cannot borak today. So, first and foremost, you must know my background. All right? Where do I come from? My family background, then you know, I will tell you after conversion what I practice. And I am sure what I share with you today, you also, the Peranakans that became Christians or Catholics, would have gone through the same journey. So where's the clicker? Where's the clicker? Oh, yeah. So this is how it works, right? No. Mana ni? Yeah, move forward. Okay, yeah, I press forward. Okay, thank you. Ah, so maybe my kong and my mama don't want me to share this with you. Ada terbantut, huh? So my family background and ancestry. This is my great grandmother. We share the same ancestry. Lilian Chua here. So she's very garang. She's called Mrs. Chan Cheng Hua. This is my mak cho. So my mak cho, we used to go to this house that belongs to my pek kong, and we used to soja. Like all Peranakan families, we used to go and smayang. So that is the centerpiece there is the portrait of my great-grandfather. Many Peranakans now wants to say, I am 9th generation Peranakan, I am 5th generation Peranakan. I do not know how many generation Peranakan I am. I just know that, there was a Kongcho and there was a Macho. We used to go in Smayang. All right? And as you know, Peranakan families, we just follow. And there was this picture, whenever I go to that house, this Smayang Abu, and then there was this picture of this lady whom I found out was Mrs. Tan Soo Jin. The great-grandson of Tan Kim Seng was Tan Soo Jin. And recently there was a book about Tan Kim Seng. So Tan Soo Jin married the first Mrs. Tan Soo Jin. She's my kopochi. So I got saudara is orang kaya. But unfortunately, I'm orang miskin. And this is my kongkong and my mama. This is Mr. Chan Kuntek and Madam Ong Chai Neo. Like all Peranakan families, they look very stern. And she had a Malay nickname, my grandmother. She's called Si Putih. Perhaps at that time she was very fair. And then this is Lilian, we share the same ancestry. In fact, she's my grandniece. This is Mrs. Chiang Jim Juan. Mr. Chiang Jim Juan is the son of Chiang Hong Lim. You know Hong Lim Green? So the Chiang family were very, very rich at that point of time. And this is Ko Besar, that lady, my great-grandmother. This is her first daughter. Her name was called Chan Kim Hong Neo. Look at her croissant. A croissant now can be sold at Sotheby's and Christie's at a big price. And this is Chiang Jim Juan, the son of Chiang Hong Lim. So these were all my relatives. So what did we do when I was young? We used to smayang. And this is my family taught we. When every time we smayang, we will have an altar cloth. Look how intricate and how nice the taught we were. Afterwards, I show you some taught we's. And then when my grandfather and my grandmother passed away, we had this tradition of having this cloth over their coffin. These are all personal photographs that I shared with you of the things that I grew up. Like for example, it was the family house in Geylang, and all of us had to go through this ritual. That gentleman, the first one was my father. The one that carrying the effigy was my father's elder brother and my auntie and my cousin. So we had to go through all this. It was long, laborious, and we do not know the significance of the ceremony. So like they say, all bodoh-bodoh, like ikut only. So whenever you ask them, they will say, stop asking, just follow. You see? So you have a monk, and then that gentleman in black is not in sackcloth. That is my auntie's husband. They all have names, Peranakan names. He's called Tio Pak Lang. So all familiar names. So all those are Peranakans. like Ronnie, or you will know, these are familiar names in the Peranakan household. And they will always be the monk. The monk will always, what we Peranakan call Liam King. You know, no offense to the Buddhists. You know, when the Buddhist monk Liam King, Namo Mi Tofu Nama, so droning. So Peranakan say, Halamak, anyway, you know, Semayam Liam King. And that's why they say the woman, when they neck, also like Liam King. And this is my grandmother. Huh? So when my grandfather died, she was the matriarch of the family. She controlled everything. This cannot, that can, spend all money. And she spent so much money until we went bankrupt, almost bankrupt. You see, so traditions, my grandmother, she was not, as the wife, you have some ranking also. You did not follow in the death rituals. You see, my grandmother, you see, all of us have to go through this, have to wear sackcloth and look miserable. My grandfather's wake was 7 days. 7 days being miserable. Look miserable, but makan not miserable. Lauk compo, hailam compo. And they have to burn house. Because in the afterlife, they must have a house. That time, house was cheap. So you buy a big bungalow to them. And then after that, there will be this, just now I show you the cloth, right? So that was our old house. And then we had to go through this ritual. Lalu peti. Again, that house on the left, on the right, if you go to Geylang, it's still there. It's now a museum. A private museum that housed a lot of Chinese paintings. It was actually owned by a Nyonya family, but all Peranakans, eventually sell to Chinese local born families. And it was born, this is Lorong 27A, it is now Geylang Avenue East. Go to this museum, it holds treasures, beautiful Chinese painting treasures. Sidetrack a little bit. So after all this, Lalu Peti, then they have the photograph. Look, usually you see that photographs, do they have photographs here? Most Peranakan families, before the funeral, they have a photograph. They love to take photographs. Even in sad times, you have photographs in remembrance. And then at the top, you see my grandfather was put in that hearse. At the top, there's they call it a lion, but actually it's a chiling to show that the deceased is a male. And then you have so many relatives at my grandfather's funeral. I can recognize, each and every one of them, my grandfather's sister-in-law, nephew and nieces. That was how closely bond the Peranakan families were. Now if you die, your son comes to your funeral, you're very lucky. Then you see, after the funeral, this was at Bukit Brown, we have to take before he was buried, his photograph. That time we had photographs already. So his photograph or his gamba, we had to bring to the grave. And then he was buried. And mind you, Peranakan being traditional, Confucianist, they just follow. They do not know the significance or what were the rites to be followed. And you know who taught them the rites? You see the man in a topi hat. He's a Chinaman. He was from Bun Bun Undertakers. The Peranakan families knows him as Encik Bayam. So he will be the person that blows the sroni for the funeral and also blows the sroni for the Peranakan wedding. So happy times and sad times, you also see him. So you see, all these rituals you have to follow. And all these people had to, follow the traditions and kowtowing a few times, and they did not know what to follow. Then after my grandmother died, and you can see her hearse there at the top is a phoenix to show that she was a woman. And of course, all of us had to mourn. Peranakan ladies mourn in style. Their sarong, you see, the first year you mourn in black and white, second year blue, third year green. 3 years of mourning. You have to be miserable, but be miserable in style. Then, not only in style, you have to show off. Your jewelry, instead of you using gold, during the mourning period, you wear perak. You wear silver and pearls. But now wedding, you see people wear silver and pearls, they do not know. Kasut manik also, you have to wear the blue and the green kasut manik during the period of mourning. So this is the type of my family background that I was brought up. Then we converted to Roman Catholicism. Do you think that our conversion was like the journey of St. Paul at Damascus? Not so. I'll tell you why. So this sideboard is very nice, belongs to my grandfather, and I found out that the earlier one that I showed you, my great-grandfather's altar, or ancestral altar, it was the same one. The two brothers had one similarly. That one sold to, I do not know, Katong Antique House or Guan Antique. But this one, lucky thing, I still have. And it's in my father's house. So when we converted to Roman Catholicism, the Goddess of Mercy was put bawah tangga. And then they put Our Lady of Mount Carmel and the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So they took center stage in our family life. And during Chinese New Year, instead of putting red oranges before the Kuan and the Topek Kong, we put before Our Lady and Jesus. So some things don't change. Oh, before I show you this one, something don't change. Even when you have this, and there's a Bible at the side which I did not take the photograph. In between the Bible will be 4D slips. Singapore sweep tickets that my father, my mother will put in. Like for example, the book of Genesis, let there be light, my father will put his 4D ticket there. Hopefully that when they draw, there will be light. So these kind of things that I grew up with. So what happened when my father passed away? My father passed away, you see the altar? His was a more simple Christian funeral. It was so different from that of my grandparents. And hers was a simple hearse. He had a funeral mass, the grandchildren all there. And eventually, so one of our relatives say, 7 days later, your father will come back. So he put his bed, put bunga rampe, his singlet and his shorts. Because on the 7th night, he will come back and the flowers all will be ruffled. His slippers there also will be, be put astray. Actually, I was very scared when I stayed there that night. All of us waited. The next day, nothing changed. But we continued to pray. Because we prayed to our Kong, we prayed to my father. So his first year, and he was hospitalized for quite some time. Then he cannot eat, he cannot stroke. Every time the next bed, people want to eat, he says, gua mau makan. So we say, alamak. During the end of his life, tak dapat makan. So never mind, afterlife, just pray. Taruh semayang. And the semayang tradition has been with my family for generations. So we continue to semayang, and I show you some of the things that we semayang at my father's house. My father has, as all Peranakans, my father had a Malay name. He was called Encik Pong. Encik Pong, because he was looked after by a Malay nanny. And then he likes to see the Malay kompang, Cak Pong. So he was called Encik Pong. So Peranakan families have all unique Peranakan names. So you see, the offerings in the first row are very Chinese. Chinese tea, Chinese wine. And then you have brandy. Very westernized. I do not know that who were here when Cedric Tan gave the talk. It was almost similar to the Malaccan and to the Peranakan Chinese of Singapore. And you see all these lau, it was all cooked by my mother and myself and our Indonesian maid. Now daughters and daughters-in-laws don't have to cook. With all due respect to my wife that is here. So on the third row, there's always proper in the Peranakan family when you pray. There will be the lauk besar, pong tahu. Pong tahu is not the bawang kepiting. Pong tahu is different. Pong tahu, ayam buah keluar, itik tim, chap chai. Then the fourth row consists of kuih, because after eating you must have dessert, kuih cuci mulut. Then after that you must have fruits, and the fruits have significance. Oranges for sweetness, pears and peaches that denotes longevity. Then in the center you have this unique prayer item called samseng. Samseng is not like the samseng, you know, the gangster. It's actually sasing, 3 types of meat that is prayed. The Melaccans are different. Some of them have a whole duck and whole chicken, but my family have this tradition. All right, so you have to have this in a centerpiece. What do you think all these things are for? Yes, to venerate your ancestors, when to show that they have given you life, education, and even wealth, right? So you venerate your ancestors in this manner. That is what I believe. But the food actually is for us. Because that mee in the center, you will fry into what we call mee semayang, now they call nyonya mee. You fry with pork stock, and then you break the egg, and then you eat with sambal timun or sambal nanas. You see, so each thing that you prayed is eaten by the descendants. Okay. Which one? No lah, that one is a kuih lah. Kuih lah. It's a layer cake someone gave from Indonesia, so I also pray with. So each lauk semayang has a meaning, right? Chap chai in Hokkien means chai is good luck. That's why you pray chap chai. And chap chai or chap chai, you don't serve during wedding or happy occasion. It is only served during ancestor worship. But now you see wedding caterer, they serve chap chai and people bodoh just eat. Pong tahu is another dish for ancestor worship. It's not to be served during weddings and birthday. Buah keluak. Why do we all pray buah keluak? Because we like to eat. And then of course this dish is called Teochew called Kiam Chai A. We call itik tim. And that's why we put the brandy in the itik tim. An English influence. Alright, so all this will be eaten by the descendants, the children who are there. Of course, we have in life and death, we must have, Peranakan must have sambal belacan. No sambal belacan cannot eat lah. My father towards the end of his life also, you bring sambal belacan in the hospital, every food must put sambal belacan. And all the kuih signifying good luck. And then because the deceased, my father smoked cigarette, so after life also let him smoke. So all these food, after prayer, we have a shared meal. When we prayed to our grandfathers and my grandmother, my uncles and my aunties, at that time my uncles were working, they will take time and off to come and eat and share the meal with us. So there was a big family gathering. It was quite fun when we were young, but not fun for my mother because she had to cook all the food. Then during Cheng Beng, the Chinese also say, we go in Semayang also. This is my grandfather. Just now you saw his funeral, right? So we go in Semayang. His grave is still in Bukit Brown. So if those of you who have ancestors, Chinese grave, you must know where do you come from. Because Peranakans do not read Chinese. Lucky thing I learned Chinese. So I know my ancestors come from Siming. Siming is a district in Xiamen. So I went to Xiamen. It was very interesting. But Siming, nothing but slot machines now. So when you have ancestors, you know where your ancestors come. You can find out from the grave. And if you go to the old graves in Bukit Brown, only the Peranakan graves, most of the Peranakan graves have English names. Have English names of the descendants. Yeah? Alamak. How do I? Yeah lah, but you know, I was not born. That was 1953. 53. Okay. Okay. Wait, they want to show the part of the grave at Bukit Brown. It's still there, it's still there. So, if any of you who have your ancestors are in Bukit Brown, go and treasure it. Because this is very important to know where your roots are. And of course, we always Peranakans have a tradition. You go and visit the grave during Cheng Beng, and you pray just simple prayer offerings would do lah. Like this, some candles, joss sticks, some fruits, and all is in even number. And that's my son. And then we put colored paper to show that the deceased have descendants. And then my grandfather smoked churut, so I smoked churut and put it there for him. So this tradition still continues. This was yes, this was the most recent one. So don't tell this to the priest that I go to the church lah. Wait, I kena ban. My grandmother was buried, but after that she was exhumed. So we still go. And we smayang lah, Put the basic thing that you can smayang at the grave, some things. Because these are all things that, has been in my family. So even after conversion, we still continue to do it. And my this is my grandfather on my mother's side, my maternal grandfather. So he was also buried but exhumed. But still we go and do simple rituals there. Why is this like that? Yeah. Thank you. Okay. You burn candles. It's the same. Why do we all have this? Why do I continue this? Because I want my children to know that where we came from, and these people played a big part in our lives. That's how we came to this world. And then my father passed away, and his niche is in the Church of the Holy Family. And his niche is the only one that got Peranakan Malay. Let me read out to you. Makan pakai kiam kurang, semua untuk anak cucu. So this epithet was for him. He saved and schemed all for his children and for his grandchildren. Yeah. I think this is the only, because the Catholic Church is quite strict. They only put, I am the resurrection and the life, that kind of thing, So when I asked for permission, the priest said, okay lah. Because you know why? I organized the Peranakan Mass in Holy Family Church. So got some clout. And then I still continue. After conducting prayers at the grave, I pray at home lah. This is my house. My kong, my mama, my acho, we pray. And all this food is cooked by, the cooked food are cooked by me. And I'm very happy that my wife is very supportive. At least she never say, don't pray. I see. So when I pray buah keluak, udang masak goreng, itik tim, pong teh, pong tahu. So, and after this prayer, I ask my sister, my brother-in-law to come. They are busy, they don't come. They say, tak senang. Like last time, you see, they will all take time to come. But now life is different. They are busy, they don't come. Give me your number, next time I ask you to come. Okay. Ken, this one you can go and buy from the Chinese grower. Cantonese called, apa tu? It's octopus, you can buy. I buy for you, then I send it to you. So these things still I continue to do because of my belief that we have connection with our ancestors. Yes, I don't burn joss paper. I don't use joss sticks, all right? But you can still continue to do this, and the food that you prepare will be a gathering of your families. And my sons appreciate it. Hopefully my wife also lah. Yeah, she's here. So you see, if you see the Peranakans when they pray, they're very srono. You see, the rice, the cups, Lauk besar, the something, the fruits. Bukan macam itu, they love to be degrading lah. Bukan macam itu Cina-Cina tak sepekal tentang bukang when they pray. Because sometimes I see some people pray, especially during Cheng Beng, they just buy a packet of food, no, they just put it there. You know? So the Peranakans do not do that. The Peranakans, maybe like Mark say, our family has been here for 200 years, 300 years. So we have that sense of tradition that we must follow. But I must tell you, it's a very difficult tradition to upkeep. You see? When my father's death anniversary last year in October, we had a prayer for him. And he loves to eat crabs. So we put crabs. Actually, after that, we eat lah with chili chuka, also shiok lah as our food. And then we had garang asam. So, it is something to remember of my father when he was alive. Yes, you may say, you know, when you become a Christian, your church tells you, and I had cousins who became very fervent Christians. Even the prayers offered to our grandparents, he refuses to eat. He even cannot see the prayer. So you see, it's a sad thing. I beg your pardon? Yeah, religious. Because when they become Christians, these food are offered to, you know, I do not know, some of you belong to the strict Christian churches. It's like that. And this is reality. And cuy cap go, I still puang teh. Kasi mama aco minum kuih and pisang raja. And on the right, this was recently prayed. Because this season is Ramadan season, I managed to buy lepat kacang. They all love to eat lepat kacang. No lah. Itu semuanya ica kuih, alamak. And then, as I told you, because I'm involved in the Catholic Church, I help to organize the Peranakan Mass every eve of the Chinese New Year. And we used to have, I say the word use, I was able to set up this table, you see. It's like Semayang Tingkong like that, but at the side of the altar to show the tradition of the Peranakans. And the last one was set up like that. After that, hell broke loose. Because of social media, many people complain. Is the church now a pagan temple? Why put this? Why put that? Then I had a letter from the bishop to the priest saying, don't put the altar up. So now it's held in abeyance. I do not know what will happen. So you see, the sad thing is that when I found out, it was the, Mark said that they had the French mission and the Portuguese mission, right? These missionary priests were for it. They say inculturalization. It's part of a tradition. It's got nothing to do with the worship of paganism. But local priests, Reverend Tan Akau, says no. We should not have all this. We should have, you know, the teachings and the whatever the early missionaries taught us. So you see, how to continue this tradition? I can only contribute to the ancestral veneration within my family. But I do not know it will be continued by my sons or not. But as long as I'm around, and as long as I have the strength, I'll continue to have this. Because it's part of my culture. And I'm very proud of the fact that, you know, we Peranakans have this sense of filial piety. And it's been imparted, and I'm practicing it. No, you see, it's simple. When you smayang, you don't have to have like the monks chant anything. You just soja, you say, Mama, kongkong datang makan. Like that, very easy. Mostly, of course, Malay lah. They understand Malay only, alamak. If you speak in English, I don't think they'll come down and eat. Yes. And the opposite actually is actually sotong lah. It signifies from the sea, and then the eggs are from birds from the air, and the meat, right, is from the earth. Sometimes they have fish in Malacca, but we put sotong. You know why? Because last time they like to panggang the sotong and eat the sotong. Right? These all have reason because the family's preferences. And eventually, they have, eventually, the prayers have been simplified to all these. Last time they used to pray 48 dishes, and then 36, then 24, then 12. Now 4 only. All right? So,
Eng Tai, how many more slides do we
yeah,
have?
finish.
good.
So, why do I continue to pray? So this is a pantun that I wrote because of my belief in ancestral veneration.
20,
Lau buah samseng tengah, semayang kongkong sama mama. Pasang lilin rampai bunga, anak cucu terang selama-lama. So in English it says, offerings of fruits and wine we place before the ancestors. Flowers aplenty and lighted candles, blessings upon the descendants. So that's why ancestral veneration is very part of my Peranakan tradition. Okay, before I end, I want to tell you, when people convert, they throw everything out. So I had this friend, and I know she's not here, so I can tell you. I think you can turn off the thing. So when they convert, they wanted to throw these 2 pieces of altar cloth. This is a contemporary altar cloth of the 8 immortals. Don't worry, Colin, I'm finishing. This is
No, don't worry, just carry on.
This is light-hearted humor.
Yes.
And this one is a beautiful one. This one is an antique one. So she asked me, you want it or not? How much? Then she said, how much you gonna pay? I said, I pay you lah. $2. That's okay, she take. Then 2 days later, I called her, but I impersonated Mr. Achun of Guan. I said, this is not her name lah. I said, Mary go Achun from Guan Antique. Itu topi itu jual babachan di $100. Dia baru jual gua 3,000.